The Southern campaign of the American Revolutionary War is my favorite part of the American Revolutionary War to read about. But the question that I'm asked a lot, and sometimes I even ask myself, is what makes the Southern campaign so interesting? Today I'm going to tackle this question and probably a bunch of other questions, knowing the rabbit hole that is the Southern campaign of the Revolution. I'm going to tackle these questions today. So the Southern campaign, I always found it really interesting because it wasn't the same type of warfare that was fought really in the North. In the North, especially during Saratoga and even during Quebec campaign, you did have guerrilla warfare to a point, but it was very much, line to line combat. You line your troops up on a big open field and you quote unquote conduct gentlemanly warfare, which, looking back 21st century, it's kind of funny to think of gentlemanly warfare. The saying, all's fair in war. And then this, in a way, it kind of contradicts that saying. That's just something that was always kind of interesting to think about how war used to be. And it was really always like that all the way up until, to a certain point, World War One. And there were certain moments where I guess that existed, the art of war, the gentlemanly sport of war. I think after World War One, it definitely died out. But the Southern campaign was different because it was an early civil war. You had brother versus brother, town versus town, one side of the state versus another state. Everyone was killing each other. And it was all started because the British decided, these people are instantly going to flock to us, and the ones that won't, well, we'll win them over, either with nice words or at the point of a bayonet. And, it worked to a point in the North. But, if you live in America, you've been to America a lot, people in the North and people in the South are different. They don't react the same way to certain situations, certain things. So the British, of course, didn't really expect this. The first attempt at Charleston, South Carolina, of course, was an epic failure for the British. And then when they tried again, it worked, but there was always the problem with the backwoods, the population. They couldn't risk potentially enemy soldiers that seemed like good citizens, people that are, they're just tending to their fields, tending to the livestock, going about their normal day, and then by night, or when the British have their backs turned, they're secretly militiamen for the Continentals, or they're guerrilla soldiers that's disrupting supply lines of communication. And so the British, they tried pretty much, not to their full abilities, but they put a lot of time and effort and resources into getting everyone on their side. It's just the people that they sent out to do this weren't exactly the world's greatest, people. They didn't have the best people skills. Christian Huck, who was one of the commanders of the British Legion, he was not the world's greatest when it came to public relations, especially getting people on his side, especially when it came to I guess Americans, because he saw all those people that weren't flocking to his lines as, they're all traitors just because they're not flocking and throwing themselves at me. They must be traitors then, when, he met these people 5 seconds ago. And that, of course, culminated in Huck's defeat, when basically a bunch of people decided they were sick and tired of that, and they killed him early one morning. He didn't even finish breakfast. Think about that. They were that angry at him, they didn't let him finish breakfast. And then, of course, you had the British semi-success, semi-disaster going into Georgia, until, of course, the Spanish and the French decided to really, really step in, especially around Savannah. And the British, the thing that, in my mind, what led to the inevitable downfall of their Southern campaign was they had this strategy. Cornwallis, Clinton, they had this idea in their mind of exactly how it's going to go down. And I don't know whether they did this intentionally or if it's something that just psychologically happened, but I guess they kind of subconsciously told themselves it can only happen this way. No other way is possible. No other way can happen. So I'm not going to think about it or plan for it, because I know for a fact it's not going to happen, because I wrote the plan down on this piece of paper. And this piece of paper written by me is exactly how it's going to happen. Which, of course, as history would tell us, it didn't happen the way that was written on that paper. So to combat, the paper kind of being thrown out the window and burned right in front of them, they overextended their lines. What they should have done, especially after, not really after Cowpens, because there were signs before Cowpens that things were starting to break down. Cornwallis was kind of flipping out about the whole partisan troops, guerrilla soldiers, and so he was basically sending these crazy troop sizes and troop numbers to go after these little bands of 50 to 100 guys. He would send 120 of his best units with 100 dragoons, or he would send 300 to go squash this little rebellion of 60. And, it makes sense that, the more men, the quicker it'll be snuffed out. But eventually, especially with the war Green was fighting, which is basically fight and tactically retreat. Fight, tactically retreat. He's eventually going to bleed Cornwallis dry, and he's going to take down those troop numbers. And then Cornwallis backs himself into a corner that he can't get out of. And that corner is eventually Yorktown, Virginia, where, the war ended. I think, when things started to go bad, especially after Cowpens, first off, how did Cornwallis, as I know he's a very smart commander, I don't know if he became, convinced of his own legend, his own image, that he kind of had tunnel vision to the whole thing. But how did he not see Nathaniel Greene's strategy? How did he not see when Tarleton reported back, okay, this is what Morgan's doing? How did Cornwallis not make the connection of what was going on? Of course, the year's currently 2018, and when I go back and look at it, hindsight's 2020. I'm like, well, this should have been obvious. Well, what makes it so obvious is I know the outcome. We all know the outcome because it happened in 1780, 1781, and it's 2018. A little bit of time has passed since then, and we've had all this time, 200 plus years, whatever it's been, to, sit back and analyze every little detail. And we finally have this answer. Okay, this is more than likely why this happened. Cause and effect, cause and effect. We know. In 1780 and 1781, Cornwallis didn't know that. But there were signs. You split up a force that harasses your troops and then breaks off. It's the equivalent of someone running up to a bigger person, hitting them in the back saying, "You can't catch me." And then the big person turns around and is like, "I really don't care." And the smaller person keeps doing it over and over and over. Eventually, you should figure out, hey, they want this to happen. They want me to chase them. They want me to use all this energy. And they know that after constantly, poking at you, annoying you, because it's not really meant to destroy you. It is literally meant to annoy you. Because if you get a person in that state where they're really, really annoyed, they're going to do something a little crazy. Crazy as in send almost half of your army with someone who does not have any training in a leadership position, someone who does not know how to run a mini campaign, and decides to force march his troops for 3 days straight and doesn't rest them before a big battle. Which, of course, I'm talking about Tarleton at Cowpens. So Cornwallis should have seen that coming. What I would have done after the whole Cowpens disaster, I would have pulled back. More than likely, either to the North Carolina border or maybe even a little bit north of Charleston, and just kind of regrouped, called my forces back in, take stock. Okay, what supplies do we have? Draw a new map of the territories we currently own, run, and have a good secure hold on. All of our armies, detachments, regiments, legions, anything. Where are our soldiers at? And who can we quickly contact in case something happens? Or if we need a quick little scouting run to see what's going on. And then, once all that stuff, you have your ducks in a row. Okay, this is good to go. All this is accounted for. We now have an accurate count of the territory we own, the ammunition we have, the supplies we have, the troops we have. Okay, now going for another campaign either further up into North Carolina or back into North Carolina. Here's what we do. And just kind of, I guess, redraw the plan for the Southern campaign. But, of course, as we know, Cornwallis didn't do this, which eventually led to Guilford Courthouse, which eventually led to Cornwallis retreating back to Wilmington, and then led to the battle in 96, siege in 96, retaking of Charleston, and then Cornwallis deciding to go to Yorktown, which, that is a really long march. I think, though, it was inevitable for the Southern campaign to fail. I think there was always going to be that harassment of supplies and of communications. And I think it was a mistake by the British to keep the hub of, I guess, their southern headquarters in Charleston. It makes sense, that's your large port, that's your first big capture of this campaign, but you're talking about a campaign that starts in Charleston, South Carolina, and then you go south towards Savannah, which, not terribly far away, especially when it comes to moving supplies, lines of communication, courier messages, reinforcements, that kind of stuff, prisoner exchanges, prisoner transportation. That's not that bad, Charleston to Savannah. But when you start talking about moving up towards Camden, and then moving towards Charlotte, North Carolina. And then you're talking about a campaign that goes into Virginia and then is going to start going towards Maryland, Pennsylvania. That's a very long line of communication. And I don't know if they were planning on, if they would have won decisively Guilford Courthouse, if they would have moved a lot of their, I guess, base of operations to Charlotte, North Carolina, or if they would have kept it in Charleston. I don't know what the overall plan was, but I think definitely before Cowpens, maybe after Camden, moving your main army operations closer to the North Carolina border so that, you have something happen in the middle of North Carolina, which North Carolina is a big state. Even by car, it feels like 1,000 years. And by the time the 1,000 years is up, you're only halfway through the state. And that's with a car. And that's, of course, obeying speed limits, because I obey speed limits like a good citizen. Now, imagine on foot or by horseback. That's going to take a really long time, going from the middle of North Carolina, even the North Carolina-South Carolina border to Charleston, South Carolina. And that doesn't take into consideration people like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, Thomas Sumter, any of those people that can stop you. So for me, if I was the British, it would have made much more sense to slowly move your base of military operations as you push north. Now, when it came to population control, putting down little rebellions, little partisan forces, resources going into the Carolinas and all that stuff, basically city management, state management, more, dealing mainly with civilians, it makes sense to keep all that stuff in Charleston. And I think they should have done that. They should have split military headquarters and base of operations from the civilian base of operations. I think that would have made much more sense. It would have made things easier, maybe less chaotic. I don't know. Like I said earlier, hindsight about this is 2020. When you look at it from 2018, which is what the year is as I'm making this video. Something else that is really interesting about the American Revolutionary War, especially the Southern campaign, is characters like Peter Francisco. Really cool character. Daniel Morgan, who is probably my favorite character of the American Revolutionary War. Just because, he was not a typical commander. He kind of not really hyped himself up, but he kind of portrayed himself as, just a regular soldier that has this position, but he doesn't need to remind you that he's General Daniel Morgan. He just seems like, in camp, hey, it's Daniel Morgan, not, oh, it's General Daniel Morgan, sir, yes, sir. I think that's also why he was able to figure out how to get militia to be effective during battle. Is he told them, look, we've all been in our first battle. We have all seen the shiny bayonets that can kill us and will kill some of us today. But you know what? We survived. And how did we survive? We put on a brave face and we shot them before they got to us. So, I don't think those were his exact words, but it was probably something along those lines, especially knowing Daniel Morgan. But the tactics that he used, not just the whole officer aiming, which, it goes back to the whole rules of warfare. You don't shoot officers. That is the first thing I would have done, would be to shoot officers, especially, when you're rank and file, your private soldiers. They're not meant to be leaders. They're literally there to take orders and fill the air with lead 2 to 3 times every minute. That's basically what they are there for. And that's basically how all the NCOs, how the generals, the lieutenants, the captains, the officers, that's how they viewed them as. So if you get rid of your officers, your captains, whoever's in charge, they're almost like mass hordes of deer in headlights. They don't know exactly what to do. So, going into the tactics, all that stuff, there is so much that went on in the Southern campaign that didn't happen in the North, or didn't happen as much in the North. It's just, for me, it's different. It was, different weaponry. Even the long rifle it saw so much use, and that was really where it started getting its reputation, aside from, of course, Saratoga, where it really got a good reputation. But I think it was cemented, its reputation, in the Southern campaign. And then, of course, you had the stories of the Over Mountain Men at Kings Mountain, which, they weren't technically a part of the American Revolutionary War. They were their own, separate nation. They did sign their own letter of Declaration of Independence. I believe it was 1772 is when they technically signed theirs. But they joined the fight. And just so really interesting, you get those little stories. But I want to thank everyone for listening to this video. Hope you all have enjoyed it. What are your thoughts on the Southern campaign? How do you think the British should have approached the campaign? Is there anything you think the Americans should have or could have done differently? And what is your favorite piece of history to study? I'd love to hear your all's thoughts in the comments. But I hope you all have a great day. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video. If you have not subscribed already, feel free to subscribe and share the video. Thank you all. Have a great day.